Night over the Pacific was supposed to be a blanket, silent, invisible, protective. Japanese pilots believed that in total darkness, no enemy could track them. But on one extraordinary night, the sky erupted with American fire that cut through the black like invisible lightning. No searchlights. No tracers guiding the aim. Just uncanny accuracy from guns that seemed to see without light. This is the moment Japan realized darkness no longer offered safety. Stay with us, like, share, and subscribe for more powerful WW2 stories. The Pacific War reshaped the meaning of distance, darkness, and danger. By 1943, Japan still relied heavily on the night sky as its most dependable shield. Their pilots, especially naval aviators trained before the severe wartime shortages, understood a simple truth: daylight belonged to America. Radar-equipped fighters, long-range patrol aircraft, and carrier task forces had made daytime raids increasingly fatal. So when the sun went down, Japan believed the advantage shifted, if only for a few hours. Night attacks became a necessity, not a choice. Slow-moving bombers struggled to bypass American defensive rings during the day, but darkness allowed them to slip past scouting patrols and approach U.S. ships or island bases undetected. Pilots were trained to fly low over black water, throttles quieted, silhouettes hidden in the moonless sky. They trusted the night because for most of the early war, darkness genuinely confused the enemy. Searchlights needed time to lock on. Optical directors struggled to track moving planes. Anti-aircraft crews depended on hearing and guesswork. For a brief window, Japanese aviators could cross hundreds of miles with a measure of confidence. But America was changing faster than Japanese intelligence believed. Across the Pacific, a quiet technological revolution was unfolding. Radar stations, once experimental, were now permanent fixtures. U.S. engineers had refined fire control systems that translated radio waves into distances, speeds, and trajectories with stunning accuracy. And on small atolls and vast carriers alike, new equipment arrived monthly: truck-mounted sets, mobile antennas, rotating dishes that swept the horizon every few seconds. The era of guessing was ending. At bases like Guadalcanal, Bougainville, and Saipan, radar crews learned to distinguish friend from foe simply by the pattern of a blip's movement. Anti-aircraft batteries were drilling day and night, combining human experience with machine precision. More importantly, American commanders embraced technology with an urgency born from early war losses. What began as crude detection evolved into integrated fire control networks capable of directing guns even when the human eye saw nothing. Japan underestimated this transformation. Their doctrine still viewed night as an ally, assuming Americans needed light to fight effectively. Reports from early 1942 reinforced this belief. Poorly coordinated U.S. searchlights, inaccurate fire bursts, and slow response times gave Japanese aviators confidence. But by late 1943, the battlefield had changed. Darkness no longer hid aircraft. Radio wave eyes swept the sky continuously, indifferent to weather, moonlight, or altitude. What Japan did not anticipate was the scale at which America deployed these systems. Radar wasn't limited to coastal defense, it was spreading to destroyers, cruisers, carriers, and even frontline marine positions. American night capability expanded so rapidly that by the time Japan realized what had happened, their pilots were flying into a trap built on mathematics, electronics, and ruthless precision. And as Japanese aircraft continued approaching under the assumption of safety, a new certainty emerged on the U.S. side, one that would define the coming clash and set the stage for the revelation that stunned every pilot who witnessed it. By early 1944, the United States had refined night defense into something far more sophisticated than Japan ever imagined. The key breakthrough wasn't just radar, it was integration. Radar alone could find a target, but the real advantage came when America connected detection, prediction, and firepower into one seamless chain. At the center of this evolution stood machines like the SCR-584 radar, a compact, rotating dish capable of tracking a fast-moving aircraft with remarkable precision. Its narrow beam could lock onto a target automatically, following it across the sky regardless of clouds, distance, or direction. With this system, the guesswork vanished. The position of an incoming bomber could be calculated down to fractions of a second. Altitude, bearing, rate of climb or descent, all translated instantly to fire control units like the M9 Director, which fed the data directly into anti-aircraft guns. What emerged was a level of accuracy unseen in any previous war. For the first time, American gunners didn't have to see the plane. They only had to trust the numbers. But the element that truly shattered Japanese expectations was the introduction of the VT proximity fuse. To pilots trained to dodge timed detonations, the idea of shells exploding when merely near the aircraft felt impossible. Traditional fuses required exact calculations and perfect timing, something nearly unattainable against a maneuvering target, especially at night. The VT fuse changed the equation entirely. Inside each shell was a miniature radar transmitter. If the projectile passed close to an aircraft, it detonated automatically. It meant that near misses became lethal. And at night, when Japanese pilots flew blind, it turned the sky itself into a weapon. American units quickly grasped the power of the system. Gun crews reported hits at altitudes they had never reached before. Radar operators learned to guide fire with a confidence that bordered on clinical. Destroyers in particular became floating ambush platforms, small, agile, and armed with radar-directed guns that could track a single aircraft even during evasive maneuvers. From the Japanese perspective, this sudden efficiency seemed unreal. Pilots returning from night raids described explosions appearing in complete darkness, without visible tracers or searchlights. They believed the Americans had developed a new method of night vision or were using some invisible spotlight technology. Others suspected a secret airborne early warning craft. Few understood that American fire was guided by machines, not eyes. The shock deepened as more crews reported the same experience: no light below, no illumination from ships, yet every approach was met with bursts of fire that tracked them flawlessly. To Japanese planners, this contradicted everything they knew about American tactics. Darkness had always been the equalizer. Now it favored the other side. And as night after night revealed the same pattern, one truth became undeniable: the Americans had built a system that rendered darkness meaningless. The only remaining question was how deeply this new reality would cut into Japan's aerial strategy, which leads to the shifting perspectives explored next. For Japanese pilots, the night sky had once carried a strange comfort. Darkness wrapped itself around the fuselage like a shield, muting engine noise, softening outlines, and erasing silhouettes. Every pilot who trained before the war was taught that clouds, moonless skies, and long stretches of ocean were natural allies. The Pacific offered endless blackness, and for years, that blackness felt like a promise: if they kept low, kept quiet, and trusted the dark, they would reach their targets unseen. But the men in those cockpits never understood how differently the Americans viewed the same sky. For U.S. crews, the night was the ultimate challenge, an obstacle that had to be overcome, not accepted. Radar operators, many of them barely out of high school, spent hours inside dimly lit huts or steel compartments learning to read the slightest flicker on a cathode screen. They treated every signal as a puzzle, every blip as a story: direction, speed, altitude, threat. Their confidence grew with each successful track, building a sense of control the Japanese could never have anticipated. On the gunnery decks, crews developed their own rhythm. The war had forced them into relentless repetition, turning drills into instinct. Hands moved without hesitation: adjust the stabilizer, align the director, feed the ammunition, lock the breech. They trusted the machines because they had seen the machines deliver results again and again. Even when the ocean churned or rain whipped across the deck, the fire control radars kept their calm, steady pulse. Where human eyes failed, electronics filled the void. The contrast between the two sides widened with every raid. Japanese aviators relied on feel, timing, and a lifetime of sky reading. Their approach to night warfare was rooted in tradition and intuition. But intuition falters against a weapon that doesn't need light, doesn't need sound, and doesn't care whether the target is visible. American technology had reduced the art of interception to a precise science. As the months passed, small details began to unsettle the Japanese pilots. Burst patterns looked unervingly accurate. Shells detonated closer than before, even when evasive turns were performed in complete darkness. Some crews reported explosions appearing around them without a trace of muzzle flash below. Others described the sensation of being hunted, of gunfire shifting with their movement, as if the enemy already knew the next maneuver before it happened. These encounters, scattered across multiple islands and naval zones, formed a pattern that no one in Tokyo could ignore. Something had changed. Something invisible. Something that moved with the Americans wherever they fought. And although the pilots could not yet explain it, they could feel an unfamiliar pressure building in the Pacific night. The safety they once trusted was slipping away, replaced by an unease they could neither describe nor escape. That tension, the growing realization that darkness was no longer theirs, would only deepen in the coming months, shaping the perspectives that unfold next. Across the Pacific, Japanese commanders tried to rationalize what their pilots were reporting. At first, they assumed it was coincidence: perhaps American ships had been alerted by patrol craft or picket submarines. Maybe a drifting cloud revealed a silhouette at the wrong moment. But as more missions ended with similar accounts, the explanations grew harder to defend. Pilots from different bases, different units, and even different islands were describing the same unsettling experience, American gunfire tracking them through complete darkness with unnatural precision. Yet inside American command centers, the story was far simpler. The system was working exactly as designed. Radar crews refined their coordination nightly, adjusting for weather patterns, humidity shifts, thermal layers, small adjustments that turned raw data into reliable predictions. Officers overseeing the networks understood the magnitude of what they had built. Every improvement, every tight grouping of blips on their screens, felt like confirmation that they were witnessing a new era of warfare. They no longer feared the night, they commanded it. For the Japanese, the realization came slowly and painfully. Night operations had been one of their few remaining advantages. Fuel shortages limited daytime training. Veteran pilots were dwindling, replaced by younger aviators with shorter instruction periods and fewer combat hours. In daylight, American fighters dominated the sky with overwhelming numbers and better machinery. Night was supposed to level the field. But now, even that sanctuary was compromised. Psychological strain rippled through squadrons. Pilots who once took pride in midnight flights began to hesitate. Some developed routines, superstitious rituals meant to ward off the invisible threat. Others flew higher or lower than their orders specified, hoping unpredictability would help. A few admitted quietly to their mechanics that they no longer trusted the darkness. It had betrayed them. Meanwhile, American ships and island bases refined the way they used silence. Many commanders ordered searchlights kept off unless absolutely necessary. Tracer fire was minimized during the first bursts. Some vessels cut all deck illumination, creating the illusion of vulnerability. Japanese scouts, observing from afar, saw nothing, no glow, no movement, no hint of preparation, until the moment the sky erupted. What looked like carelessness was deliberate discipline. The Americans were learning to disappear into the same darkness the Japanese once claimed. But the greatest gap between the two nations lay in mindset. Japanese doctrine focused on bravery, instinct, and the honor of the pilot guiding his machine. American doctrine focused on coordination, humans and technology fused into one lethal mechanism. In this new environment, courage alone meant little. The pilots who trusted their senses were flying into a world controlled not by sight but by mathematics and radio waves. And as the reports mounted, Japanese headquarters faced a sobering truth: darkness was no longer an ally. It had become an accomplice of the enemy. The stage was now set for the moment when these shifting forces would collide in a single night, the moment when Japan would learn, beyond any doubt, that American guns no longer needed light. The turning point came on a moonless night in late 1944, when a formation of Japanese bombers approached an American naval task group positioned east of the Philippines. The ocean below was a black sheet, broken only by the soft churn of propellers carving through the water. Above, the sky was so dark that even the horizon vanished. For the Japanese crews, conditions seemed perfect: no moon, no wind, no clouds reflecting starlight. It was the kind of night that had once guaranteed safety. Radio silence held across the formation. Engines throttled low. Every cockpit glowed faintly from instrument dials, faces illuminated in soft red light. Veterans in the lead bomber reassured themselves that American ships couldn't possibly track them without searchlights. They had flown nights like this for years. Darkness had never failed them. But over the American task group, another world was unfolding. Inside a radar control hut on the flagship, operators watched the screen with calm, practiced focus. Tiny blips appeared on the edge of the sweep, first faint, then sharper, moving in a steady arc toward the fleet. There was no hesitation. The positions were plotted, their altitude measured, their speed confirmed. Within seconds, the data flowed from the radar room to the fire control directors positioned on multiple ships. The gunners saw nothing but darkness around them. Yet the instruments guiding their guns were already alive with movement. Dials rotated. Servomotors hummed. Elevation wheels turned on their own as gun mounts aligned by mathematical precision. Each director followed its assigned target, invisible to the eye but perfectly clear on the radar grid. The Japanese formation descended to begin its attack run. Not a single searchlight came on. No tracers arced upward. No signal suggested the Americans even knew they were there. Then the first bursts detonated. The sky erupted with explosions that had no visible origin, no bright streams, no glowing paths, no warning. Shells burst near the lead bomber, filling the air with shrapnel that shredded through metal skin and fuel lines. The pilots jerked instinctively, banking left, but the next salvo followed the turn instantly. It was as if the fire itself was locked onto them. Panic rippled through the formation. Reports flashed between cockpits: unseen guns. Impossible accuracy? No lights. They're firing blind. But the Americans were anything but blind. Below, destroyers and cruisers were executing the choreography they had drilled for months. Radar directors fed continuous updates to the M9 predictors. Proximity-fused shells detonated whenever they neared the shadow of a passing aircraft. What had once required perfect timing now required only proximity. Each burst illuminated the bombers for a fraction of a second, brief ghosts in a world of darkness, before the night swallowed them again. One bomber plunged into the sea, trailing fire that reflected off the waves like a sliced ribbon of orange. Another tried climbing, seeking altitude where gunners might lose track. But the radar beams followed without effort, tracking the ascension like a line drawn on a chart. Shells burst behind and above it, catching the aircraft as it leveled off. Within moments, it spiraled downward in a widening arc. The surviving pilots could hardly comprehend what they were experiencing. No matter how they maneuvered, steep dives, sudden climbs, sweeping banks, the American fire adjusted instantly. Darkness offered no escape. Evasion patterns that once confused night gunners did nothing now. They were being seen through the black. On the U.S. flagship, one radar operator whispered to the man beside him, not with excitement, but with the calm certainty of someone witnessing a new form of warfare, "They don't even know how visible they are." The final aircraft, damaged but still airborne, broke formation and fled east. The pilot pushed the throttle until the engine strained. He didn't care about fuel. He didn't care about formation integrity. All he knew was that staying meant death, and the night he once trusted had turned against him. Below, the American ships returned to silence. No cheers. No celebration. To them, the system had performed exactly as intended. For Japan, the shock of that night would echo far beyond the burning wreckage on the water. It marked the moment when every surviving pilot understood the truth: the Americans no longer needed light to fight. And the consequences of that realization would reshape everything that came next. Dawn revealed the scale of the disaster. The sea, calm and glassy after the night's violence, carried scattered debris drifting between the American ships, fragments of wing panels, strips of fabric, a section of twisted propeller. Nothing else remained. The bombers that vanished into the black left no survivors, no radio signals, no final transmissions. Only silence. And for the Japanese command, that silence became the loudest warning of the war. Reports trickled back slowly. The lone pilot who escaped the encounter landed at a remote airstrip with a crippled aircraft barely holding together. His debriefing lasted hours. Officers listened to him describe explosions appearing out of darkness, shells detonating with unnatural timing, and gunfire adjusting instantly to every movement. He had flown dozens of night missions. Nothing had prepared him for what he witnessed. When his testimony was compared with earlier accounts from other missions, the pattern became undeniable. This was no coincidence. American anti-aircraft fire had reached a level of precision that Japanese planners had not believed technologically possible. And the most unsettling detail was the one repeated by every surviving pilot: they never saw a single light from the American ships. No searchlights. No tracers. No visual guidance of any kind. It was as if the enemy's guns operated with senses the Japanese could not detect. Inside Japanese naval headquarters, the implications spiraled quickly. Night raids, once crucial for bypassing American fighter patrols, were now a liability. Aircraft losses were mounting, yet the pilots could not explain why. Even experienced aviators who trusted their instincts began refusing to fly night operations unless absolutely necessary. The sense of invisibility that had once empowered them evaporated. Now, every mile flown in darkness felt like a gamble against an enemy who could strike without warning. American intelligence noticed the shift almost immediately. Radar stations recorded fewer nocturnal attempts. Island bases saw far less activity overhead. Naval commanders, reviewing post-action logs, understood that the impact of the new systems extended beyond physical destruction. Japanese morale had been wounded in a way artillery alone could not achieve. On U.S. ships, the mood was entirely different. Crews felt a growing confidence, not reckless, but calm, disciplined certainty. Radar operators trusted their instruments implicitly. Gun crews moved with the rhythm of men who knew their equipment worked, even when they saw nothing. Officers submitted after-action reports filled with verified hit ratios that would have been unimaginable only 2 years earlier. The integration of radar, directors, and proximity fuses was no longer experimental. It was proven, repeatable, and devastating. The larger strategic impact unfolded quietly. With Japanese night attacks faltering, American logistics lines became even harder to disrupt. Supply ships reached island assaults with minimal interference. Repair yards, fuel depots, and command centers experienced fewer bombing attempts. Each successful American landing pushed the front line closer to Japan, tightening the noose around an empire running out of options and pilots. For Japan's aerial command, the lesson was clear but painful: the night belonged to the Americans now. Technology had rewritten the rules of warfare, turning darkness into a battlefield where only one side could see. And in the months that followed, that understanding would force Japan to reconsider not just tactics, but the very future of its air strategy, leading directly into the consequences explored next. The night skies of the Pacific once symbolized uncertainty, vast, silent, and unknowable. But after 1944, they carried a different meaning. Darkness, which had sheltered countless Japanese aviators in the early years of the war, now served a new master. American technology had stripped it of mystery, turning what was once a refuge into a transparent battlefield. Radar beams, proximity fuses, and tightly coordinated fire control networks revealed a truth that defined the modern age: the most decisive weapon is not the one that shines brightest, but the one that operates unseen. What happened that night echoed far beyond the loss of a single bomber formation. It exposed the widening gap between two visions of warfare, one rooted in instinct and tradition, the other driven by engineering and relentless innovation. Japan's pilots fought with courage, but courage alone could not overcome a system that eliminated the very element they depended on. For the Americans, the transformation was profound. They no longer feared the unknown spaces beyond the horizon. Every radar sweep, every calculated burst, every plotted intercept strengthened their belief that mastery of information was as vital as mastery of firepower. Victory no longer belonged solely to the fastest aircraft or the sharpest eyes. It belonged to those who could see without seeing, strike without illumination, and trust the quiet certainty of numbers. In the end, the Pacific War proved that darkness offers no protection against a nation that refuses to fight blind. And as the world moved forward, this lesson shaped every conflict that followed. When technology reveals the invisible, even the blackest night becomes clear as day.